Detective Sarah Martinez received the call at 7:43 a.m. on Tuesday, March 15, 2005. A maintenance worker clearing debris from abandoned properties along Route 47 had made a grim discovery in a ruste. "Looks like they've been here for years." Martinez arrived at the scene 30 minutes later. The dirt road was barely passable, requiring her to park her cruiser 50 yards from the trailer and walk through thick weeds. The structure sat isolated, its white aluminum siding now brown with rust and neglect. Inside, forensic technician David Chen was photographing skeletal remains found beneath a pile of old blankets. The victim appeared to be a young woman, based on bone structure and remnants of clothing. "Any identification?" Martinez asked. Chen held up a tarnished silver bracelet. This was on the wrist, engraved with Victoria Elizabeth Hawthorne and a birth date showing she would be 24 now. Martinez felt her stomach drop. Victoria Hawthorne. The name was burned into the memory of every law enforcement officer in 3 counties. The 19-year-old daughter of real estate mogul Robert Hawthorne had vanished from Riverside Mall on December 3, 2000. Despite massive search efforts, rewards totaling $2 million, and national media coverage, she had simply disappeared without a trace. "Call the state lab," Martinez instructed. "This is priority 1. The original investigation had consumed the department for months. Victoria had been shopping alone, captured on security cameras entering the mall at 2:15 p.m. She purchased coffee at 2:30 and was seen browsing in several stores. The last footage showed her near the food court at 4:47 p.m. talking on her cell phone. After that, nothing." Martinez studied the scene. The trailer showed signs of long-term habitation. Empty food containers, a sleeping bag, and personal items suggested someone had lived here regularly. Most disturbing were the chains and padlocks found near the remains, indicating Victoria had been held against her will. The coroner arrived at noon. Dr. Patricia Williams, a veteran medical examiner, carefully examined the remains while Martinez watched. "Cause of death will require full autopsy," Williams said. "But I can tell you she's been dead approximately 5 years, which matches your timeline. The skull shows trauma consistent with blunt force impact." Martinez photographed everything methodically. The trailer's interior revealed a makeshift living space with evidence of 2 occupants. Men's clothing, tools, and hunting magazines suggested her captor was male. A calendar from 2000 was marked with X's through December 4th onward. She was killed the day after she disappeared, Martinez concluded. The discovery sent shockwaves through the Hawthorne family and the community. Robert Hawthorne, now 57, had never stopped believing his daughter would come home alive. His wife Margaret had suffered a complete breakdown after Victoria's disappearance and remained in psychiatric care. Martinez contacted the Hawthorne estate. The family's attorney, James Crawford, answered. "We need to speak with Mr. Hawthorne immediately," Martinez said. "We've found Victoria." The silence on the phone lasted nearly 10 seconds. "Is she—" Crawford began. "We'll discuss details in person. Can you arrange a meeting for this afternoon?" The Hawthorne mansion sat on 50 acres in the exclusive Millbrook subdivision. Martinez had been there many times during the original investigation. Robert Hawthorne met her in his study, flanked by Crawford and private investigator Daniel Ross, whom the family had hired to continue searching when police leads dried up. Hawthorne appeared to have aged 20 years in 5. His once commanding presence was diminished. His shoulders stooped with grief. When Martinez confirmed the identification through the bracelet and dental records, he collapsed into his chair. "Where?" he whispered. Martinez described the location. Hawthorne's face showed confusion. "Route 47. That's nowhere near the mall. How did she get there?" "That's what we need to determine. The scene suggests she was held captive before being killed." Ross leaned forward. "I drove every road within 50 miles of that mall. I never found that trailer." "It's well hidden," Martinez admitted. "You'd have to know exactly where to look." The implications were clear. Victoria's abductor was familiar with the area's remote locations. He had planned this carefully, selecting an isolated spot where screams would never be heard. Crawford asked about the investigation timeline. Martinez explained they were treating this as a fresh homicide case, despite the 5-year gap. "Every piece of evidence will be re-examined," she promised. "Every witness statement will be reviewed. Someone knows what happened to Victoria." Hawthorne requested to visit the scene. Martinez gently refused, explaining it remained an active crime scene. The pain in his eyes was unbearable. "She was just buying Christmas presents," he said quietly. "She had gifts for her mother, her brother. They're still wrapped in her room." The meeting concluded with Martinez promising daily updates. As she drove back to the station, her mind raced with questions. Who had taken Victoria? Why kill her so quickly instead of demanding ransom from one of the wealthiest families in the state? And why had the body remained undiscovered for 5 years in a location that should have been searched? The case file would be reopened tomorrow, but tonight, Martinez felt the weight of a promise to a broken father. Victoria Elizabeth Hawthorne deserved justice, and someone in their community knew exactly who was responsible for her death. Reopening the case, Martinez spent Wednesday morning reviewing the original case files in Conference Room B. The Victoria Hawthorne investigation had generated over 3,000 pages of reports, witness statements, and evidence logs. 5 years later, reading through them revealed patterns she had missed initially. Detective Lieutenant Frank Morrison joined her at 9 a.m. Morrison had led the original investigation before his promotion and knew every detail of the case. "What jumped out at you?" he asked, settling into a chair across from her. Martinez spread out the mall security footage stills. "Look at this sequence. Victoria's on her phone at 4:47 p.m. near the food court. Phone records show she received a call at 4:45 p.m. from an unlisted number that lasted 3 minutes. We traced that call. Came from a prepaid phone purchased with cash. Dead end. But look at her body language in the footage. She's animated, gesturing. This isn't a threatening call. She knows the person." Morrison studied the images. Victoria appeared relaxed, even smiling during parts of the conversation. "You think someone lured her out?" he asked. "I think someone she trusted convinced her to meet them outside the mall." The forensics report from the trailer scene arrived at 10:30 a.m. DNA evidence confirmed Victoria's identity and revealed additional crucial information. Hair samples from the trailer matched an unknown male subject. More significantly, fingerprints were found on a water bottle and food containers. 12 clear prints, forensics technician Chen reported. "Ran them through CODIS and got a hit." Martinez felt her pulse quicken. "Who?" "Marcus Webb, age 29. Arrested in 1999 for stalking. Served 18 months. Released October 2000, 2 months before Victoria disappeared." Morrison grabbed the file. Marcus Webb had been convicted of stalking a college student in the neighboring county. His pattern involved following young women, learning their routines, and eventually approaching them with elaborate stories about needing help or knowing their families. His probation officer was Thomas Bradley, Morrison noted. "Let's pay him a visit." Bradley's office was located in the county courthouse. He remembered Webb clearly. "Creepy guy," Bradley said. "Always talking about rich families, how they lived, what they drove. He was obsessed with wealth and status." Bradley explained that Webb had been required to report weekly during his probation period. His last check-in was November 27, 2000, 6 days before Victoria's disappearance. "He missed his December appointments," Bradley continued. "Warrant was issued, but we never found him. Assumed he'd left the state." Martinez asked about Webb's known associates and hangouts. Bradley provided an address for Webb's last known residence, a rundown apartment complex on the east side of town. The apartment building superintendent, elderly Mrs. Chen, remembered Webb well. "Quiet tenant, always paid rent in cash," she said. "But strange hours. Gone for days at a time, then back with expensive items he claimed to find at garage sales." Webb's former apartment had been re-rented, but Mrs. Chen had stored some belongings he'd left behind. In a dusty box, Martinez found photographs of various locations around town, including several shots of the Riverside Mall parking lot and entrance areas. "He was scouting," Morrison observed. "Planning something." The photographs were dated September through November 2000. Webb had clearly been studying the mall layout and security patterns for months before Victoria's abduction. Martinez contacted Webb's former employer, a landscaping company called Green Valley Services. The owner, Rick Patterson, fired Webb in August 2000 for erratic behavior and unauthorized absences. He kept asking personal questions about clients, Patterson explained, wanted to know about their homes, their families, their schedules, made people uncomfortable. Patterson provided a list of properties where Webb had worked. Martinez cross-referenced them with wealthy residential areas and found a disturbing pattern. Webb had worked on landscaping projects for 6 families who lived within 5 miles of the Hawthorne estate. He was surveying targets, Martinez realized. The investigation team expanded to include Detective Ray Sullivan and Officer Jennifer Hayes. They divided the task of interviewing Webb's former clients and associates. Sullivan's interviews revealed that Webb had asked multiple homeowners about their children, specifically their daughters' ages and activities. 3 families reported that Webb had lingered around their properties longer than necessary and had been observed taking photographs. Hayes tracked down Webb's ex-girlfriend, Angela Foster, who lived in a trailer park 15 miles from where Victoria's remains were found. Marcus was obsessed with money and status, Foster told Hayes. He'd drive through rich neighborhoods for hours, talking about how unfair life was, how some people didn't deserve what they had. Foster confirmed that Webb owned a pickup truck and knew the rural areas well from hunting trips with his father. She also revealed a crucial detail. Webb had mentioned the abandoned trailer specifically. He said it was the perfect place to disappear if someone needed to hide, Foster recalled. Said his dad used to take him there hunting when he was a kid. The timeline was becoming clearer. Webb had studied Victoria's routine, learned she shopped alone regularly, and used his knowledge of her family's wealth to craft a plan. The phone call on December 3rd had likely been him posing as someone in distress, appealing to Victoria's well-known charitable nature. Martinez returned to the Hawthorne estate that evening to update Robert Hawthorne on their findings. His reaction to Webb's name was immediate and unexpected. "I know that name," Hawthorne said slowly. "Marcus Webb. He worked on our landscaping project last summer." The connection sent chills through Martinez. Webb had not only surveyed the Hawthorne property, but had been inside their gates, observing their family routines firsthand. He would have seen Victoria coming and going, Hawthorne continued, learned her schedule, her habits. The investigation now had a clear suspect with means, motive, and opportunity. But Marcus Webb had been missing for over 5 years. Finding him would require examining every lead from his past and determining if he was still alive, still in the area, or had fled after killing Victoria. Tracking the suspect. Thursday morning brought new developments in the search for Marcus Webb. Detective Sullivan had spent the night running Webb's financial records and discovered something significant. A Social Security number match for employment at a construction company in neighboring Millfield County, dated just 3 months ago. Martinez drove to Millfield Construction at 8 a.m. The company owner, Tony Castellano, confirmed that a Marcus Webb had worked there briefly under the name Mark Webster, using forged documentation. "Decent worker, kept to himself," Castellano said. But something felt off about him, always asking about local families, especially the wealthy ones up on Hillcrest Drive. 1. Castellano provided a description that matched Webb's last known appearance, plus crucial new information. Webb drove a blue Ford pickup truck with Alabama plates and lived in a rented room above Murphy's Bar on Railroad Street. The rooming house was a 3-story building that had seen better decades. Landlord Patrick Murphy led Martinez and Morrison up narrow stairs to room 7, which Webb had vacated 2 weeks earlier. "Left in the middle of the night," Murphy explained. "Paid through the month but never came back for his security deposit." The room contained few personal items, but what remained told a disturbing story. Martinez found newspaper clippings about Victoria's disappearance taped to one wall, along with printed articles about the Hawthorne family's business ventures and charitable activities. More alarming was a notebook filled with detailed observations about several local families. Webb had documented daily routines, vehicle descriptions, and family member schedules for at least 8 households in affluent neighborhoods. "He's been planning additional abductions," Morrison observed grimly. Among Webb's notes were detailed drawings of home layouts, security system observations, and what appeared to be escape routes marked on local maps. One entry, dated February 2005, focused on the Patterson family of Hillcrest Drive. Martinez contacted the Patterson household immediately. Jennifer Patterson, age 17, was a high school student whose parents confirmed she had been followed twice in recent weeks by someone matching Webb's description. "We reported it to local police," Jennifer's father, David Patterson, said. "They increased patrols, but nothing came of it." The Patterson family was placed under protective surveillance, while the manhunt for Webb intensified. Martinez issued a statewide alert with Webb's description and the truck information. Sullivan's investigation of Webb's background revealed a troubling escalation pattern. Before the stalking conviction, Webb had been arrested twice for trespassing on private property, and once for voyeurism. Each incident involved young women from wealthy families. "He's not random," Sullivan reported. "He specifically targets daughters of successful men. It's about power and revenge against a social class he blames for his failures." The forensics team completed their analysis of evidence from the trailer. In addition to Webb's fingerprints and DNA, they found traces of chloroform on fabric remnants, suggesting Victoria had been chemically subdued during transport. Dr. Williams provided additional details from the autopsy. Victoria had suffered multiple head injuries consistent with a metal object like a hammer or wrench. The injuries indicated a prolonged assault rather than a single fatal blow. "She fought back," Williams concluded. "Defensive wounds on her arms show she tried to protect herself." This information devastated Robert Hawthorne when Martinez briefed him Thursday afternoon. Learning that his daughter had suffered before dying was almost more than he could bear. "Why didn't he ask for ransom?" Hawthorne asked. "I would have paid anything." Martinez explained that Webb's psychology didn't center on money, but on inflicting pain on successful families. Killing Victoria served his psychological needs better than any financial gain. Hawthorne revealed additional information about Webb's time working on their property. Victoria had been home from college during the landscaping project and had been characteristically friendly to all the workers, bringing them cold drinks and asking about their families. "She was just being kind," Hawthorne said. "That kindness cost her everything." The investigation team worked late Thursday night, coordinating with law enforcement across 3 states. Webb's truck was spotted twice on highway cameras, both times heading south toward the Georgia border. Angela Foster, Webb's ex-girlfriend, contacted Martinez with additional information. She remembered Webb mentioning a cousin who lived near Savannah, Georgia, someone who had offered him work if he ever needed to disappear for a while. "Marcus always had escape plans," Foster said. "He was paranoid about being caught for something. Now I know what." Friday morning brought the break they needed. Georgia State Police located Webb's truck abandoned at a rest stop near Macon. Webb was captured 6 hours later, attempting to board a Greyhound bus to Florida, carrying a backpack with $15,000 in cash and false identification documents. During the arrest, Webb initially claimed innocence, but quickly demonstrated knowledge of details about Victoria's disappearance that had never been released to the public. "I never meant to hurt anyone," he told Georgia authorities. "Things just got out of control." Webb waived extradition rights and was transported back to face charges Friday evening. Martinez and Morrison interviewed him at the county jail, where his facade of innocence quickly crumbled under questioning. "Victoria was supposed to understand," Webb said. "Rich girls like her, they have everything handed to them. They don't know what it's like to struggle." When pressed about the phone call that lured Victoria from the mall, Webb admitted to posing as a mall security guard who claimed her car was being broken into. "She was so trusting," he said with disturbing satisfaction. "Followed me right to the parking garage." The confession continued with Webb describing how he had used chloroform to subdue Victoria and transport her to the trailer. His original plan had been to hold her for ransom, but when she recognized him from working at her family's property, he realized she could identify him. "I panicked," Webb said. "Couldn't let her go after that." The full scope of Webb's crimes was still being investigated, but his notebooks suggested he had been planning similar abductions of other wealthy families' daughters. Victoria's murder had been his first successful completion of a fantasy he had been developing for years. As Martinez concluded the interview, She felt satisfaction at closing the case but profound sadness for the Hawthorne family. Justice was finally within reach, but it could never restore what they had lost. Yoshratso. The confession. Saturday morning, Marcus Webb requested to speak with his court-appointed attorney Michael Harrison before making any further statements. Harrison, a veteran public defender, arrived at the county jail at 9 a.m. to meet with his client. Webb appeared calm but exhausted during the consultation. Harrison reviewed the evidence against him, which was overwhelming. DNA, fingerprints, witness testimony, and Webb's own partial confessions during arrest. Your only option is cooperation, Harrison advised. Full confession might spare you the death penalty. Webb agreed to a formal interview with prosecutors present. District Attorney Catherine Reynolds joined Martinez and Morrison for the session at 2 p.m., with Harrison representing Webb's interests. Mr. Webb, you understand you're being recorded, and that anything you say can be used against you in court? Reynolds began. Webb nodded. I want to tell the truth about what happened to Victoria. The confession that followed was detailed and disturbing. Webb described months of planning, beginning when he first saw Victoria during the landscaping project at the Hawthorne estate in July 2000. She was different from other rich girls I'd seen, Webb said. She talked to me like I was a real person, but it wasn't genuine. None of them are genuine. Webb explained how he had researched Victoria's routine, learning she often shopped alone at Riverside Mall on weekday afternoons. He studied the mall's layout, security cameras, and parking areas over several weeks. The phone call was easy, he continued. I told her I was mall security, that someone was breaking into her car. She believed me immediately. Webb led Victoria to a remote section of the parking garage where his truck was parked. He had modified the truck bed with a tool chest that concealed restraints and chloroform supplies. She started getting suspicious when we reached the truck, Webb said. Asked to see my security badge. That's when I had to use the chloroform. The chemical quickly subdued Victoria, allowing Webb to bind her hands and transport her to the abandoned trailer. The drive took 45 minutes through rural back roads he knew from childhood hunting trips. She was awake when we got there, Webb continued. Started recognizing me from her house. That's when I knew I couldn't let her go. Victoria's captivity lasted approximately 18 hours. Webb had originally planned to call her father with ransom demands, but panicked when he realized she could identify him to police. I kept thinking about solutions, Webb said. Maybe I could relocate her somewhere else, change my appearance, leave the state, but she was too smart. She would have found a way to escape or signal for help. The murder occurred on the evening of December 4, 2000. Webb struck Victoria with a wrench during an argument about her family's wealth and his own financial struggles. She said her father would help me if I just let her go, Webb recalled. Said rich people weren't my enemy, but she didn't understand what it's like to have nothing while people like her have everything. Webb's rage escalated during the conversation. He struck Victoria multiple times, initially intending only to silence her, but ultimately killing her when she continued trying to reason with him. I didn't plan to kill her, Webb insisted, but once it happened, I had to figure out how to cover it up. Webb concealed Victoria's body in the trailer and returned to his apartment, attempting to maintain his normal routine. He reported to his probation officer as scheduled on November 27th, but missed subsequent appointments as the search for Victoria intensified. I stayed in the area for 2 weeks, watching the news coverage, he said. When police started interviewing landscaping workers, I knew I had to leave. Webb fled to Georgia, where he found work under false identification while monitoring news coverage of Victoria's case. He returned to the region periodically to check on the trailer and ensure the body remained concealed. I thought about moving her, he admitted, but I was afraid of leaving more evidence. Reynolds pressed Webb about other potential victims. His notebooks contained detailed surveillance information on several young women from wealthy families. I was planning, Webb acknowledged, but Victoria was the only one I actually took. Webb confirmed that the Patterson family had been his next target. He had been following Jennifer Patterson for 3 weeks, studying her routine and identifying opportunities for abduction. Harrison interrupted to clarify that his client was confessing only to crimes involving Victoria Hawthorne and was not admitting to planning additional abductions. Reynolds accepted the limitation, but noted that Webb's surveillance activities could result in additional stalking charges. The confession session lasted 4 hours, with Webb providing detailed descriptions of his methods, timeline, and disposal of evidence. He led investigators to locations where he had discarded items from Victoria's purse and cell phone. "Why come back to this area?" Martinez asked. "You could have stayed in Georgia and never been caught." Webb's answer revealed the depth of his psychological obsession. "I needed to see the family suffering," he said. "Read about Robert Hawthorne's pain, his wife's breakdown. It felt like justice for all the advantages they'd had in life." The confession concluded with Webb expressing no remorse for Victoria's death, but some regret about the impact on her family. "I didn't hate Victoria personally," he said. "She represented something I could never have. Taking that away felt like balancing the scales." Harrison requested a break to consult with his client about plea negotiations. Reynolds indicated the state would consider life imprisonment without parole in exchange for Webb's cooperation in locating all evidence and providing complete details about his crimes. As the day ended, Martinez felt a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. They had solved Victoria's case and prevented future abductions, but Webb's coldness about her murder was deeply disturbing. Robert Hawthorne was informed of the confession that evening. His response was quiet but firm. "I don't care about his reasons. I just want justice for Victoria." The legal proceedings would continue, but the investigation phase was essentially complete. Victoria's family finally had answers, even if those answers brought no comfort. Building the case. Monday morning, District Attorney Catherine Reynolds convened a prosecution team meeting to plan the case against Marcus Webb. The evidence was overwhelming, but Reynolds wanted to ensure the death penalty case was airtight. Detective Martinez presented the complete evidence package: DNA matches, fingerprints, Webb's detailed confession, witness testimony, and physical evidence from the trailer. The forensics team had processed over 200 pieces of evidence linking Webb to Victoria's abduction and murder. Defense will likely argue temporary insanity or diminished capacity, Prosecutor James Mitchell predicted. Webb's obsession with wealth inequality could be framed as a mental health issue. Reynolds dismissed that strategy. Webb's months of planning, sophisticated surveillance, and successful evasion of capture for 5 years demonstrate clear premeditation and competence. The prosecution team decided to seek the death penalty based on the kidnapping-murder combination and the especially heinous nature of the crime. Victoria's 18 hours of captivity constituted torture under state law. Meanwhile, defense attorney Michael Harrison was developing his own strategy. He requested psychological evaluation of Webb to assess mental competency and potential defenses. Dr. Angela Foster, a forensic psychiatrist, spent Tuesday morning evaluating Webb at the county jail. Her initial assessment found Webb legally competent, but noted significant personality disorders consistent with antisocial behavior. Webb demonstrates clear understanding of right and wrong, Dr. Foster reported. His actions were deliberate and goal-oriented, not the result of mental illness or defect. Harrison also investigated Webb's background for mitigating factors. Webb's childhood had been marked by poverty, an absent father, and witnessing domestic violence. His mother, Carol Webb, had struggled with alcohol and depression. Marcus was angry from a young age, Carol Webb told Harrison during a phone interview. Always felt like the world owed him something. I tried to get him help, but he refused counseling. Harrison's mitigation investigation revealed that Webb had shown signs of antisocial behavior since adolescence. He had been suspended from school multiple times for threatening other students and had been fired from several jobs for inappropriate conduct toward female co-workers. The prosecution team interviewed Victoria's friends and family to establish the impact of her murder. Her college roommate Sarah Chen described Victoria as extraordinarily kind and generous. Victoria volunteered at homeless shelters and mentored at-risk teenagers, Chen said. She used her family's privilege to help others. Webb killed someone who was actually trying to make the world better. Victoria's brother, Michael Hawthorne, age 21, provided emotional testimony about his family's destruction following his sister's disappearance. "My mother hasn't spoken a coherent sentence since Victoria vanished," he said. "She sits in her room looking at Victoria's photographs and asking when she's coming home. My father aged 20 years in 5. Webb didn't just kill my sister, he destroyed my entire family." The prosecution team also built a timeline showing Webb's escalating criminal behavior. The stalking conviction in 1999 was preceded by multiple incidents of following women and attempting to initiate contact through deception. Webb's pattern shows clear progression toward violence, Prosecutor Mitchell noted. Victoria was the culmination of years of planning and fantasy development. Reynolds scheduled the arraignment for Thursday, March 25, 2005. Webb would formally enter his plea, and the court would set trial dates. Given the complexity of the death penalty case, trial was anticipated for late fall 2005. Robert Hawthorne met with the prosecution team Wednesday afternoon to discuss his role as a witness and his feelings about the death penalty pursuit. "I've never supported capital punishment," Hawthorne said quietly, "but this man took my daughter's life for sport. He deserves the ultimate penalty." Hawthorne provided additional details about Webb's behavior during the landscaping project. Victoria had mentioned Webb specifically as being unusually friendly and asking personal questions about the family. She said he seemed lonely and asked about her college plans, her friends, her schedule, Hawthorne recalled. "We thought he was just making conversation." The prosecution team realized Webb had used Victoria's natural kindness against her, gathering intelligence that would later facilitate her abduction. Wednesday evening brought unexpected news. Angela Foster, Webb's former girlfriend, contacted police with additional information. She had discovered a box of Webb's possessions in her storage unit, items he had left behind when they broke up in 1998. The box contained disturbing materials, photographs of several young women taken without their knowledge, detailed notes about their family's wealth and social status, and newspaper clippings about kidnapping cases from other states. Marcus studied other crimes, Foster explained. He had articles about the Lindbergh kidnapping, the Patty Hearst case, and several more recent abductions of wealthy families' children. Most disturbing was a handwritten journal detailing Webb's fantasies about abducting and controlling wealthy women. The entries dated back 3 years before Victoria's murder and included specific plans for different scenarios. "He wrote about it like a hobby," Foster said. Planning the perfect crime became his obsession. The journal entries revealed the depth of Webb's resentment toward successful families and his desire to cause them pain. Victoria's murder was not an impulsive act, but the fulfillment of carefully developed fantasies. Martinez presented this new evidence to Reynolds, who recognized its value in proving premeditation and establishing motive. "This journal shows Webb wasn't a desperate man who made a terrible mistake," Reynolds said. "He was a predator who carefully selected his victim and method." The prosecution case was now completely developed. Webb's trial would present overwhelming physical evidence, detailed confession, and proof of extensive premeditation. The defense would struggle to find any mitigating factors that could spare Webb's life. As Thursday's arraignment approached, the Hawthorne family prepared for the legal process that would finally bring justice for Victoria. The trial would be painful, but necessary to ensure Webb could never harm another family. Robert Hawthorne spent Thursday morning at Victoria's grave, a ritual he had maintained every week since her funeral. Now, finally, he could tell her that her killer would face justice. "We found him, sweetheart," he whispered to the headstone. "He'll pay for what he did to you." The arraignment, Thursday, March 25, 2005, brought Marcus Webb's formal arraignment before Judge Patricia Williams in the county courthouse. The media attention was intense, with reporters from 3 states covering the first court appearance since Webb's capture. Webb entered the courtroom wearing orange jail clothing and shackles. His appearance had changed significantly during his time on the run. He was thinner, with longer hair and a beard that partially concealed his face. Defense attorney Michael Harrison sat beside him at the defendant's table. District Attorney Catherine Reynolds represented the state, flanked by prosecutors James Mitchell and Sarah Collins. The prosecution team had spent the week preparing for this moment, ensuring every legal requirement was met for the capital murder case. Judge Williams called the court to order at 9 a.m. sharp. The courtroom was packed with spectators, including several members of the Hawthorne family and reporters from major news outlets. "Mr. Webb, you are charged with first-degree murder in the death of Victoria Elizabeth Hawthorne," Judge Williams announced. "You are also charged with kidnapping, aggravated assault, and obstruction of justice. How do you plead?" Harrison stood beside his client. "Your Honor, we enter a plea of not guilty to all charges." The plea was expected, but it formalized the adversarial process that would determine Webb's fate. Judge Williams scheduled a series of pretrial hearings to address motions from both sides. Reynolds immediately filed notice of the state's intent to seek the death penalty, citing the aggravated circumstances of kidnapping combined with murder. The death penalty notice triggered additional legal procedures and extended the expected timeline for trial. Harrison filed several motions challenging the admissibility of evidence, particularly Webb's confession statements made during his arrest in Georgia. The defense argued that Webb had been coerced and had not properly waived his Miranda rights. "My client was exhausted and frightened when he made those statements," Harrison argued. "He was not in a condition to make knowing and intelligent waivers of his constitutional rights." Reynolds countered that Webb had been properly Mirandized multiple times and had explicitly waived his right to remain silent. The confession was voluntary and contained details that only the perpetrator could know. Judge Williams scheduled an evidentiary hearing for April 8 to determine the admissibility of Webb's confession statements. This hearing would be crucial for both sides, as the confession formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. Robert Hawthorne attended the arraignment with his son Michael and family attorney James Crawford. Seeing Webb in person for the first time since learning of Victoria's murder was emotional for the family. "He looks so ordinary," Michael Hawthorne observed afterward. "It's hard to believe someone like that could destroy so many lives." Following the arraignment, Reynolds held a press conference on the courthouse steps. She outlined the state's case and reaffirmed their commitment to seeking the maximum penalty. "Victoria Hawthorne was a bright young woman with her entire life ahead of her," Reynolds stated. "Marcus Webb stole that future for his own twisted satisfaction. The state will ensure he faces the full consequences of his actions." Harrison declined to comment extensively, but indicated that the defense would vigorously challenge every aspect of the prosecution's case. "Mr. Webb maintains his innocence and looks forward to his day in court," Harrison said. "We will examine every piece of evidence and ensure his constitutional rights are protected." The arraignment generated significant media coverage, with television news programs featuring the story prominently. Victoria's case had captured national attention during the original investigation, and the resolution was equally newsworthy. Detective Martinez watched the coverage from her office, feeling satisfaction at seeing the case reach this milestone. The investigation had consumed her thoughts for weeks, and she was pleased to see justice moving forward. Wednesday brought additional developments in Webb's case. Prosecutors discovered that Webb had been corresponding with other inmates at the county jail, discussing details of his crime and expressing no remorse for Victoria's death. He told another inmate that Victoria deserved what happened because rich girls think they're better than everyone, Prosecutor Mitchell reported. He showed absolutely no empathy or regret. These statements could be used to demonstrate Webb's callous attitude and lack of remorse, factors that supported the death penalty argument. The prosecution team added the corresponding inmates to their potential witness list. Defense attorney Harrison faced significant challenges in developing a viable defense strategy. The physical evidence was overwhelming. Webb's confession was detailed and corroborated by facts, and his background showed a pattern of escalating antisocial behavior. Harrison focused on psychological mitigation, hoping to establish that Webb suffered from mental illness or developmental trauma that influenced his actions. He retained Dr. Robert Martinez, a forensic psychiatrist, to conduct a comprehensive evaluation. "Our goal isn't to excuse Webb's actions but to provide context for his behavior," Harrison explained to his team. "Even in death penalty cases, juries can be swayed by evidence of severe mental illness or childhood trauma. The psychiatric evaluation revealed that Webb had suffered significant abuse as a child and exhibited traits consistent with antisocial personality disorder. However, these findings did not support a legal insanity defense or significantly diminish his culpability. Robert Hawthorne spent the days following the arraignment reflecting on the legal process ahead. The trial would force his family to relive Victoria's death in excruciating detail, but he believed it was necessary for closure. "Victoria deserves to have her story told completely," he told family members. "Even if it's painful for us, the world needs to understand what happened to her and why." Margaret Hawthorne, Victoria's mother, remained in psychiatric care and was not competent to participate in the legal proceedings. Her doctor, Dr. Elizabeth Thompson, reported that Margaret continued to believe Victoria was still alive and would return home soon. Mrs. Hawthorne's mind has created a protective barrier against accepting her daughter's death, Dr. Thompson explained to the family. Forcing her to confront the reality of the trial could cause complete psychological collapse. The family decided that Margaret would be shielded from trial coverage and would not be called as a witness unless absolutely necessary. Robert Hawthorne would represent the family's interests in court proceedings. Friday brought Webb's first psychiatric evaluation session with Dr. Robert Martinez. The evaluation was conducted at the county jail under strict security protocols, with corrections officers present throughout the session. Webb appeared cooperative but showed little emotional response when discussing Victoria's murder. He described the crime in clinical terms, as if discussing a business transaction rather than taking a human life. "Victoria was a symbol of everything wrong with society," Webb told Dr. Martinez. "Rich families hoard wealth while people like me struggle. What I did was evening the score." Dr. Martinez noted Webb's complete lack of empathy for Victoria as a person. He viewed her solely as a representative of a social class he resented, not as an individual with her own hopes, dreams, and relationships. "Webb demonstrates classic antisocial personality disorder," Dr. Martinez reported to Harrison. "He's capable of understanding right from wrong but lacks the emotional capacity to care about the impact of his actions on others." The psychiatric evaluation would continue over several weeks, but initial findings suggested Webb was legally competent to stand trial and did not suffer from mental illness that would excuse his criminal behavior. Prosecutor Reynolds used the time before the next hearing to strengthen the state's case. She interviewed additional witnesses who could testify about Webb's pattern of stalking behavior and his specific threats against wealthy families. Angela Foster, Webb's former girlfriend, agreed to testify about Webb's obsession with surveillance of rich families and his detailed plans for revenge against society's successful members. Marcus would drive through expensive neighborhoods and point out houses where he'd like to teach the owners a lesson, Foster recalled. He talked about making rich people understand what loss felt like. Foster's testimony would help establish Webb's motive and demonstrate that Victoria's murder was part of a larger pattern of resentment and planning, rather than an isolated incident. The prosecution team also located Webb's former co-workers from the landscaping company who could testify about his inappropriate interest in clients' personal lives and his specific comments about the Hawthorne family. Webb asked a lot of questions about the Hawthorne daughter, former co-worker Randy Phillips recalled. "Wanted to know her schedule, where she went to school, what kind of car she drove. At the time, we thought he might have a crush on her." These witnesses would help prosecutors prove that Webb had specifically targeted Victoria based on information he gathered while working at her family's property. As the case moved toward trial, the Hawthorne family began preparing for the emotional ordeal ahead. Robert Hawthorne met with victim advocates who would help the family navigate the court process and provide support during difficult testimony. "The trial will be like losing Victoria all over again," the victim advocate warned. "But it's also your opportunity to ensure her memory is honored and her killer is held accountable." The April 8th evidentiary hearing would determine whether Webb's confession could be used at trial. Both sides prepared extensively for arguments that could determine the outcome of the entire case. If the confession was excluded, prosecutors would rely heavily on physical evidence and witness testimony. If it was admitted, Webb's own words would likely guarantee his conviction and support the death penalty verdict. The evidentiary hearing, April 8, 2005, marked a crucial turning point in the prosecution of Marcus Webb. The evidentiary hearing to determine the admissibility of Webb's confession would shape the entire trajectory of the trial. Judge Patricia Williams convened court at 9 a.m. with both legal teams present. Defense attorney Michael Harrison had prepared extensively to challenge the confession, while District Attorney Catherine Reynolds was equally ready to defend its admissibility. Harrison called his first witness, Dr. Stephen Miller, a forensic psychologist who had evaluated Webb's mental state during his arrest in Georgia. Dr. Miller testified that Webb showed signs of severe stress and possible dissociation when taken into custody. Mr. Webb was sleep-deprived, malnourished, and in a state of psychological crisis, Dr. Miller testified. His capacity to make rational decisions about waiving constitutional rights was significantly impaired. Reynolds cross-examined Dr. Miller aggressively, pointing out that Webb had demonstrated clear understanding of the charges against him and had specifically requested to speak with officers about Victoria's case. Dr. Miller, isn't it true that Mr. Webb corrected officers when they made factual errors about the timeline? Reynolds asked. Yes, but that doesn't necessarily indicate competence to waive Miranda rights. And he provided specific details about evidence that only the perpetrator could know? That's correct. Reynolds established that Webb's responses were coherent, detailed, and factually accurate, contradicting the defense claim that he was too impaired to make knowing decisions. Harrison next called Detective Ray Sullivan from the Georgia State Police, who had participated in Webb's arrest. Sullivan's testimony was intended to show that Webb had been coerced through prolonged interrogation without adequate rest or legal counsel. We questioned Mr. Webb for approximately 6 hours over 2 days, Sullivan testified. He seemed eager to talk and initiated many of the conversations about the victim. Under cross-examination, Sullivan admitted that Webb had been properly fed, allowed to sleep, and repeatedly informed of his right to an attorney. Webb had specifically declined legal representation multiple times. Did Mr. Webb ever ask to stop the questioning? Reynolds inquired. No, ma'am. He seemed to want to continue talking. Did he ever claim he was too tired or stressed to continue? No, he did not. The prosecution called Detective Martinez to testify about Webb's behavior during formal interviews. Martinez described Webb as alert, responsive, and demonstrating detailed knowledge of facts that had not been released to the public. Mr. Webb corrected us when we stated incorrect information about the crime scene, Martinez testified. He provided specific details about evidence we hadn't disclosed, including the location of items he had disposed of after the murder. Martinez's testimony established that Webb's confession contained information that corroborated physical evidence, making it highly reliable regardless of his psychological state during arrest. Harrison attempted to introduce evidence of Webb's childhood trauma and mental health issues as factors that impaired his ability to waive constitutional rights. Dr. Angela Foster, the forensic psychiatrist who had evaluated Webb, testified about his antisocial personality disorder. Mr. Webb's psychological profile shows significant impairment in decision-making processes related to legal consequences, Dr. Foster testified. His antisocial traits may have prevented him from understanding the full implications of waiving his Miranda rights. Reynolds countered with testimony from Dr. Robert Martinez, who had conducted more extensive evaluations of Webb. Dr. Martinez concluded that Webb was legally competent despite his personality disorders. Mr. Webb demonstrated clear understanding of the charges against him, the potential penalties, and his constitutional rights, Dr. Martinez testified. His personality disorder doesn't prevent him from making informed legal decisions. The hearing included audio recordings of Webb's confession sessions. Judge Williams and both legal teams listened to Webb's detailed descriptions of planning Victoria's abduction, carrying out the crime, and disposing of evidence. In the recordings, Webb's voice was clear and steady. He asked clarifying questions about legal procedures and requested breaks when he needed them. His responses showed no signs of confusion or impairment. "I want to explain what really happened to Victoria," Webb could be heard saying on the recording. "I know you need the truth, and I'm ready to tell it." Harrison argued that Webb's eagerness to confess was itself evidence of impaired judgment, suggesting he was not competent to waive his rights to silence and legal counsel. A rational person facing potential death penalty charges would not voluntarily provide detailed confessions, Harrison argued. "My client's behavior demonstrates psychological impairment that invalidated his Miranda waiver." Reynolds responded that Webb's cooperation was strategic rather than impaired. Webb had been captured with overwhelming physical evidence and chose cooperation as his best option for potential plea negotiations. Mr. Webb made a calculated decision to confess in hopes of avoiding the death penalty, Reynolds argued. His confession was voluntary, informed, and corroborated by physical evidence. Judge Williams took a 1-hour recess to review the evidence and legal precedents before ruling on the confession's admissibility. The courtroom was tense as Judge Williams returned to render her decision. Robert Hawthorne sat in the gallery with his son Michael, both understanding that this ruling could determine whether Victoria's killer faced the ultimate penalty. "After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence," Judge Williams announced, "I find that Mr. Webb's confession was voluntary and admissible. The defendant was properly advised of his constitutional rights, demonstrated clear understanding of those rights, and voluntarily chose to waive them." The ruling was a significant victory for the prosecution. Webb's detailed confession would be central to proving his guilt and establishing the aggravated circumstances that supported the death penalty. Harrison requested an immediate appeal of the ruling, but Judge Williams denied the motion, stating that appellate review could occur after trial if Webb was convicted. Following the hearing, Reynolds addressed reporters outside the courthouse. "This ruling ensures that Marcus Webb's own words will be heard by the jury," she stated. His confession provides crucial details about how and why he murdered Victoria Hawthorne. Harrison declined to comment but indicated the defense would continue fighting the charges vigorously at trial. The evidentiary hearing had strengthened the prosecution's case significantly. With Webb's confession admitted, conviction seemed nearly certain. The focus would now shift to the penalty phase, and whether Webb would receive life imprisonment or death for Victoria's murder. Trial preparation. May 2005 brought intensive preparation for Marcus Webb's murder trial, scheduled to begin June 15th. Both prosecution and defense teams worked 12-hour days building their cases and preparing witnesses for testimony. District Attorney Catherine Reynolds assembled a prosecution team of 4 attorneys, 2 investigators, and 3 victim advocates. The complexity of the death penalty case required extensive preparation and coordination. "This trial will likely last 6 weeks, Reynolds told her team. "We need to present every piece of evidence methodically and ensure the jury understands the full scope of Webb's crimes." The prosecution strategy focused on 3 key elements: overwhelming physical evidence, Webb's detailed confession, and the aggravated circumstances that justified the death penalty. Detective Martinez worked with prosecutors to organize evidence presentation. The state had collected over 300 pieces of physical evidence, including DNA samples, fingerprints, clothing fibers, and photographs from the crime scene. "We'll walk the jury through Webb's entire criminal process," Prosecutor James Mitchell explained. From his initial surveillance of Victoria through the murder and cover-up, the prosecution team practiced witness examinations and evidence presentation using a mock courtroom setup. Victim advocates helped prepare the Hawthorne family for their testimony, which would be emotionally devastating but legally necessary. Robert Hawthorne met with prosecutors weekly to review his testimony. He would need to describe Victoria's character, her relationship with the family, and the impact of her murder on their lives. "I want the jury to see Victoria as more than just a victim," Hawthorne told Reynolds. "She was a brilliant, compassionate young woman who deserved a full life." Defense attorney Michael Harrison faced the challenge of defending an obviously guilty client against overwhelming evidence. His strategy focused on avoiding the death penalty rather than securing acquittal. "Our goal is life imprisonment without parole," Harrison explained to his team. We'll acknowledge Webb's guilt, but argue that mental illness and childhood trauma should spare him from execution. Harrison retained 3 expert witnesses, Dr. Angela Foster to testify about Webb's antisocial personality disorder, Dr. Stephen Miller to discuss his psychological impairment, and Dr. Rachel Thompson to explain the impact of childhood trauma on adult behavior. The defense team spent considerable time researching Webb's background to identify mitigating factors. They interviewed his mother, former teachers, and childhood neighbors to document the abuse and neglect he had experienced. Marcus was a damaged child who became a dangerous adult, Harrison told his experts. We need to help the jury understand how his early experiences shaped his criminal behavior. Webb himself proved to be a difficult client. He showed no remorse for Victoria's murder and actively resisted his attorney's efforts to portray him sympathetically. I don't want people feeling sorry for me, Webb told Harrison during a consultation. I did what I believed was right. Rich people like the Hawthorns needed to understand loss. Webb's lack of cooperation complicated the defense strategy. Harrison couldn't present genuine remorse or rehabilitation potential when his client continued to justify the murder. June 1st brought the final pretrial conference, where both sides addressed outstanding motions and logistical issues. Judge Williams established strict media guidelines and security protocols for the high-profile trial. This courtroom will maintain dignity and respect for all parties, Judge Williams announced. Any disruption will result in immediate removal and potential contempt charges. The jury selection process began June 8th with a pool of 200 potential jurors. Given the death penalty aspect and extensive media coverage, finding impartial jurors proved challenging. Each potential juror completed extensive questionnaires about their knowledge of the case, attitudes toward capital punishment, and ability to remain impartial despite emotional testimony. Have you formed any opinions about Mr. Webb's guilt or innocence based on media coverage? Reynolds asked each potential juror during voir dire. Many prospective jurors were dismissed due to pre-existing opinions about Webb's guilt or strong feelings about the death penalty that would prevent them from considering all sentencing options. The final jury consisted of 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from 28 to 67. None had extensive knowledge of the case details, and all expressed ability to consider both life imprisonment and death penalty as appropriate sentences if Webb was convicted. Robert Hawthorne observed jury selection from the gallery, trying to assess which jurors might be sympathetic to his family's loss. The process was emotionally draining as he realized these 12 strangers would determine his daughter's killer's fate. They seem like good people, he told his son Michael. I hope they understand what Victoria meant to us and what Webb took away. The week before trial, both sides filed final motions and completed witness preparations. The prosecution had 47 witnesses on their list, including law enforcement officers, forensic experts, family members, and Webb's former associates. The defense witness list included 12 people, primarily mental health experts and character witnesses, who would testify about Webb's troubled background during the penalty phase. Detective Martinez spent the weekend before trial reviewing her testimony and evidence presentation. She had investigated hundreds of cases during her career, but Victoria's murder had affected her more deeply than most. This case represents everything wrong with our society, she reflected. A young woman with everything to live for, killed by someone consumed with jealousy and hatred. As June 15th approached, the courthouse increased security measures and prepared for intense media attention. The trial would be one of the most closely watched criminal cases in the state's recent history. The Hawthorne family spent the night before trial in quiet reflection. Tomorrow would begin the final chapter in their quest for justice for Victoria, but it would also force them to relive the worst tragedy of their lives. We're ready, Robert Hawthorne told his family attorney. Whatever happens, we know we've done everything possible to ensure Victoria's killer faces justice. The trial begins. Monday, June 15, 2005, dawned clear and unusually cool for mid-June. By 7 a.m., reporters and spectators had formed long lines outside the county courthouse, hoping to secure seats for opening statements in the Marcus Webb murder trial. Judge Patricia Williams called court to order at 9 a.m. sharp. The courtroom was packed to capacity, with overflow viewers directed to a separate room where proceedings would be broadcast on closed-circuit television. Marcus Webb sat at the defense table wearing a dark blue suit provided by his attorneys. He appeared calm but pale, occasionally glancing toward the gallery where Robert and Michael Hawthorne sat in the front row. District Attorney Catherine Reynolds rose to deliver the prosecution's opening statement. She approached the jury with confidence, carrying a folder containing photographs and documents that would anchor her presentation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Reynolds began, "this case is about a young woman named Victoria Hawthorne who had her entire life ahead of her when she was brutally murdered by the defendant Marcus Webb in December 2000. Reynolds walked the jury through the timeline of Victoria's disappearance, the 5-year search, and the eventual discovery of her remains in the abandoned trailer. She described the physical evidence linking Webb to the crime and previewed his detailed confession. "You will hear Mr. Webb's own words describing how he planned this abduction for months, how he lured Victoria from the mall with lies, and how he killed her when she threatened to expose his identity," Reynolds continued. The prosecutor displayed photographs of Victoria taken during her college years, showing a vibrant young woman engaged in volunteer work and family activities. The contrast with crime scene photographs would be stark and intentional. "Victoria Hawthorne was 19 years old when Marcus Webb decided she should die," Reynolds concluded. "She died because the defendant resented her family's success and wanted to cause them pain. This was not a crime of passion or desperation. It was calculated murder, and the defendant deserves the ultimate penalty for his actions." Defense attorney Michael Harrison approached the jury with a more subdued demeanor. He acknowledged the tragedy of Victoria's death while attempting to humanize his client. "What happened to Victoria Hawthorne was a terrible tragedy," Harrison began. "No one disputes that. But before you decide whether Marcus Webb should live or die, you need to understand the complete story of how this tragedy occurred." Harrison outlined Webb's troubled childhood, his struggles with mental illness, and the circumstances that led to his criminal behavior. He emphasized that Webb had not planned to kill Victoria initially. "Marcus Webb is a sick man who made terrible decisions," Harrison argued, "but he is not the cold-blooded killer the prosecution wants you to believe. His actions were the result of mental illness and a lifetime of trauma that left him unable to function normally in society." The defense attorney asked the jury to consider life imprisonment without parole as an appropriate sentence that would protect society while acknowledging Webb's mental health issues. "Death is permanent," Harrison concluded. "Once that sentence is carried out, there's no opportunity to reconsider or correct mistakes. Marcus Webb will never be free again, but taking his life won't bring Victoria back or heal her family's wounds." Following opening statements, the prosecution began presenting evidence. Detective Martinez was the first witness, describing the discovery of Victoria's remains and the crime scene investigation. Martinez walked the jury through photographs of the trailer, pointing out evidence of long-term habitation and restraints used to hold Victoria captive. Her testimony was methodical and professional, establishing the foundation for the state's case. "The scene clearly indicated that someone had been held against their will in this trailer," Martinez testified. "The chains, padlocks, and personal items suggested both the victim and perpetrator had spent considerable time there." Under cross-examination, Harrison attempted to raise questions about the crime scene investigation and evidence collection, but Martinez's thorough documentation left little room for challenge. The prosecution next called forensic technician David Chen to testify about DNA and fingerprint evidence. Chen explained how Webb's genetic material and fingerprints were found throughout the trailer, establishing his presence at the crime scene. "The defendant's DNA was found on multiple surfaces inside the trailer," Chen testified. "Hair samples, saliva traces, and skin cells provided clear identification. Additionally, we recovered 12 distinct fingerprints belonging to Mr. Webb." Chen's testimony was supported by detailed charts and photographs showing the locations where evidence was collected. The scientific proof of Webb's presence was overwhelming and virtually impossible to dispute. Dr. Patricia Williams, the medical examiner, provided testimony about Victoria's autopsy and cause of death. Her clinical description of Victoria's injuries was difficult for the family to hear, but necessary for the prosecution's case. The victim suffered multiple blunt force trauma injuries to the head and torso, Dr. Williams testified. The pattern of injuries suggests repeated strikes with a heavy object, likely a hammer or wrench. Death would have occurred within minutes of the final blow. Williams also testified about defensive wounds on Victoria's arms, indicating she had fought against her attacker before being killed. The victim clearly attempted to protect herself, Williams said. This was not a quick or painless death. The first day of testimony established the basic facts of the case. Victoria was dead. She had been murdered in the trailer, and Webb was connected to the crime through overwhelming physical evidence. Robert Hawthorne watched the proceedings with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Finally, after 5 years, the truth about his daughter's death was being told in a court of law. But hearing the clinical details of Victoria's murder was almost unbearable. "She suffered," he whispered to his son Michael during a break. "That monster made her suffer before he killed her." Michael placed a supportive hand on his father's shoulder. "At least now everyone will know what he did. Victoria's getting the justice she deserved." As court adjourned for the day, reporters gathered outside the courthouse to provide updates on the trial's opening day. The prosecution had made a strong start, but the defense would have opportunities to present their case in the coming weeks. Judge Williams reminded all participants that media coverage should not influence their decisions and that court would reconvene Tuesday morning for continued prosecution testimony. The Hawthorne family returned to their hotel, emotionally drained, but feeling hopeful that justice was finally within reach for Victoria. Justice for Victoria. The Marcus Webb murder trial continued for 3 more weeks, with the prosecution presenting a methodical case that left no doubt about Webb's guilt. Witness after witness testified about Webb's planning, his surveillance of Victoria, and the brutal execution of his crime. Webb's own confession proved to be the most damaging evidence. When audio recordings of his detailed admissions were played in court, several jurors appeared visibly shaken by his cold, matter-of-fact description of Victoria's murder. "I struck her repeatedly with the wrench," Webb's voice could be heard saying on the recording. "She kept trying to negotiate with me, saying her father would help me if I let her go, but I knew she would identify me to police." The defense team's efforts to present mitigating evidence about Webb's troubled childhood and mental health issues made little impact on the jury. Webb's own lack of remorse, demonstrated through his testimony and attitude during the trial, undermined any sympathy the defense might have generated. After 6 weeks of testimony, closing arguments began on Monday, July 25, 2005. District Attorney Catherine Reynolds delivered a powerful summation that recounted Webb's crimes in detail and asked the jury to hold him fully accountable. "Marcus Webb planned this murder for months," Reynolds told the jury. "He studied Victoria's routine, selected the perfect location for his crime, and executed his plan with calculated precision. This was not the act of a mentally ill man in crisis. This was premeditated murder committed by someone who wanted to cause maximum pain to a family he resented." Defense attorney Michael Harrison made one final plea for his client's life, emphasizing Webb's mental health issues and asking the jury to choose life imprisonment over death. "Marcus Webb is guilty of a terrible crime," Harrison acknowledged, "but executing him won't bring Victoria back. It will only add another death to this tragedy." The jury deliberated for 8 hours over 2 days before reaching their verdict. On Wednesday, July 27, 2005, they returned to the courtroom to announce their decision. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus Webb, guilty of first-degree murder," the foreperson announced. The courtroom remained silent as additional guilty verdicts were read for kidnapping and aggravated assault charges. Judge Williams scheduled the penalty phase of the trial for the following week, when the same jury would decide whether Webb should receive life imprisonment or death for his crimes. The penalty phase focused entirely on whether Webb deserved to die for his actions. The prosecution presented impact statements from Victoria's family and friends, describing the devastating effect of her murder on everyone who knew her. Robert Hawthorne took the witness stand to speak about his daughter and the destruction of his family following her death. "Victoria was everything good about humanity," he testified through tears. "She was kind, generous, and dedicated to helping others. Her murder destroyed not just her future, but the future of everyone who loved her. My wife has never recovered from losing Victoria. She lives in a psychiatric facility because she cannot accept that our daughter is gone. Michael Hawthorne testified about losing his sister and watching his parents deteriorate following Victoria's disappearance. "Webb didn't just kill my sister," Michael said. "He killed my family. We'll never be whole again." The defense presented testimony from mental health experts about Webb's personality disorders and traumatic childhood, but their arguments failed to generate significant sympathy from the jury. Webb himself chose not to testify during the penalty phase, maintaining his defiant attitude even as the jury deliberated his fate. On Friday, August 5, 2005, the jury returned with their sentencing recommendation. The courtroom was packed with reporters, law enforcement officers, and members of both families. "We, the jury, recommend that Marcus Webb be sentenced to death for the murder of Victoria Elizabeth Hawthorne," the foreperson announced. The Hawthorne family embraced each other, feeling that justice had finally been served for Victoria. Webb showed no emotion as the verdict was read, remaining seated and staring straight ahead. Judge Williams scheduled formal sentencing for August 15th, when she would officially impose the death sentence and set execution procedures in motion. At the sentencing hearing, Judge Williams addressed Webb directly before imposing the ultimate penalty. "Mr. Webb, you have been found guilty of the most heinous crimes possible under our law," Judge Williams said. "You planned and executed the kidnapping and murder of an innocent young woman whose only crime was showing kindness to a troubled man. Your actions have caused immeasurable pain to the Hawthorne family and to this community. Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to death by lethal injection, to be carried out at the state penitentiary in accordance with state law." Webb was immediately transported to death row, where he would spend years awaiting execution while his attorneys pursued mandatory appeals. Robert Hawthorne addressed reporters outside the courthouse following the sentencing. "Today we receive justice for Victoria," he said. "It won't bring her back, but it ensures that Marcus Webb will pay the ultimate price for his terrible crimes. Victoria was a beautiful, loving young woman who deserved to live a full life. Webb stole that from her, from us, and from the world." The case had lasting impacts on the community and law enforcement procedures. The Riverside Mall installed additional security measures and improved communication between security personnel and local police. The extended search for Victoria led to enhanced protocols for missing person cases involving potential abductions. Detective Martinez reflected on the case's conclusion with mixed emotions. Justice had been served, but the cost in human suffering was enormous. "Cases like this remind you why we do this job," she said. Victoria Hawthorne was failed by society when Webb wasn't properly monitored after his previous conviction. We can't undo that failure, but we can ensure he never hurts anyone else. Robert Hawthorne established the Victoria Hawthorne Foundation, dedicated to improving security for young women and supporting families of crime victims. The foundation's work became his way of honoring his daughter's memory while helping others avoid similar tragedies. Margaret Hawthorne never recovered sufficiently to understand that Webb had been convicted and sentenced to death. She remained in psychiatric care, still waiting for Victoria to come home. Marcus Webb exhausted his appeals over the next 8 years, with each court rejecting his claims of ineffective counsel and procedural errors. He was executed by lethal injection on January 12, 2006, still showing no remorse for Victoria's murder. On the day of Webb's execution, Robert Hawthorne visited Victoria's grave to tell her that justice had finally been completed. "It's over, sweetheart," he whispered to her headstone. "He can't hurt anyone else now. Rest in peace, my beautiful daughter." The Victoria Hawthorne case became a landmark in criminal justice, demonstrating how advances in forensic science and persistent investigation could solve even cold cases that seemed impossible to crack. Victoria's memory lived on through her family's advocacy work and the security improvements implemented to protect other young women from predators like Marcus Webb. Though nothing could restore what the Hawthorne family had lost, Victoria's legacy became one of justice served and lives protected through the hard work of dedicated law enforcement professionals who refused to let her killer escape accountability for his crimes.